Hi all and welcome back of what will be a fairly lengthy intel. And two of these, the first two are actually news items, but it needs to tie in and certainly ties in with previous intel of what has gone on and what is going on. And the first two are linked. An independent UN human rights expert warned on Friday that the new Israeli coalition government's plan to proceed with annexing significant parts of the occupied West Bank will be a blow to the international order and undermine prospects for a negotiated settlement. Now, according to Michael Link, the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967, quoted, Israel's decision to unilaterally march ahead with the planned annexation on July the 1st undermines human rights in the region and would be a severe body blow to the rules-based international order. And Link expressed alarm that Israel's annexation plans are being supported and facilitated by the United States. If the annexation plans proceed, what would be left of the West Bank would become a Palestinian Bantustan, an archipelago of disconnected islands of territory surrounded and divided up by Israel with no connection to the outside world, according to that reporter. Now, the plan includes the Jordan Valley, which I warned of last year, funny enough, and if brought to fruition would lead to a cascade of bad human rights consequences, and going ahead with it would also further undermine any remaining prospect for a just and negotiated settlement, he said. The plan would crystallize a 21st century apartheid, leaving in its wake the demise of the Palestinians' right to self-determination. Legally, morally, politically, this is entirely unacceptable. Now, human rights violations arising from Israeli occupation would only intensify after the annexation, Link said, and the UN expert said that annexation had been strictly prohibited under international law since the adoption of the Charter of the United Nations in 1945. Then why hasn't it been implemented? Why has the US, who are in bed with AIPAC and the lobbyists, allowed to veto every bill? Israel, the country, and the clowns that run it, not the people, have had more violations of the UN than all the countries on the rest of the world combined, and never been pulled up once. This goes back to the Pope piece mentioned earlier and the Caliphate. That's what they're doing. They're not going back to the perceived biblical borders. Oh no. That goes all the way to Egypt and right across to Turkey and eventually back to India. Go and look at the war zones on the map. It also goes halfway down that peninsula, because that's what it said in the Bible. Unreal. The fact that this is now being highlighted proves further the war between the Rothschilds and the Black Sun. And here is another example, an actual report from the Department of Justice Office of Public Affairs for immediate release on April the 30th. Israel's largest bank, Bank Hapoalim, admits to conspiring with US taxpayers to hide assets and income in offshore accounts. Bank Hapoalim, Switzerland, no surprise, pleads guilty, and Bank Hapoalim BM enters into deferred prosecution agreement for criminal misconduct and agreed to pay nearly $875 million in fines. Jeffrey A. Rosen, the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, Richard E. Zuckerman, the Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General of the Justice Department's Tax Division, Jeffrey S. Berman, the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, and Don Fort, the Chief of the IRS, Criminal Investigation IRS-CI, announced today the guilty plea of Bank Hapoalim Switzerland Limited and filing of criminal charges against Bank Hapoalim BM for conspiring with US taxpayers to hide more than $7.6 billion in more than 5,500 secret Swiss and Israeli bank accounts. Remember the money that Kim pulled back? Oops. And the income generated in these accounts from the IRS. BHS Chief Executive Officer appeared on behalf of the bank to enter the guilty plea before the U.S. District Judge Mary K. Weisgersil, and as part of today's resolution, along with resolutions entered into with state and federal partners, Bank Hapoalim BM, which is Israel's largest bank, and Bank Hapoalim Switzerland, its Swiss subsidiary, agreed to pay approximately $874.27 million back to the US Treasury, the Federal Reserve, and also to the New York State Department of Financial Services. Wonder where the stimulus check money came from. Today's resolution is the second largest recovery by the Department of Justice in connection with its investigation since 2008 into facilitation of offshore US tax evasion by foreign banks. And today's resolution and payment of $874 million make clear that tax evasion cannot be taken lightly, according to Jeffrey Rosen, and a fair tax system requires even-handed compliance. Indeed it does. Quite why it takes two dark forces to be battling before people get fined is beyond me, but at least it's a start. And honest conduct by all participants in the system. That's a laugh. The Department of Justice continues to aggressively prosecute banks and other financial institutions that help US taxpayers conceal their income and assets in offshore bank accounts, according to the Deputy Assistant Attorney General, Mr. Zuckerman. And today, Bank Hapoalim is being held accountable for its conduct, and it has admitted to its crimes and will surrender all fees it earned, repay the United States for lost tax revenue, and also pay a substantial fine. On it goes. So Israel's largest bank and its Swiss subsidiary have admitted not only failing to prevent but actively assisting US customers to set up secret accounts to shelter assets and income and to evade taxes, according to US Attorney Jeffrey Berman. And the combined payments approaching $1 billion reflects the magnitude of the tax evasion by the US bank's US customers and the size of the fees the banks collected to provide this illegal service and the gravity of the illegal conduct. So they were charging people to do it as well. There is no excuse for a foreign financial institution to unlawfully assist wealthy Americans in flouting their responsibilities to pay their taxes, said the IRS Criminal Investigation Chief Don Fort. With today's guilty plea, Bank Hapoalim is taking responsibility for their role in deliberately breaking the law and undermining the integrity of this nation's tax system. Offshore tax evasion is a top priority for IRS criminal investigation. Really? And what about that 800 billion that went out of the IRS to a Swiss bank, remember? Perhaps they need to look in-house a bit more. Anyway, they said they are wholeheartedly committed to bringing offenders to justice, and today's resolution serves as proof that financial institutions engaging in tax fraud face dire criminal and financial consequences for their behaviour. One thing I didn't notice was any arrests. The vast majority of New Yorkers follow the rules and pay their taxes, thereby contributing their fair share towards critical state and federal government operations and public services, said Superintendent Lacewell of New York State Department of Financial Services. But she said there are some, however, who went to great lengths to avoid paying their share, and Bank Hapoalim offered a whole array of services to US citizens, including New Yorkers, that knowingly facilitated their tax evasion. DFS will not tolerate such behaviour from banks that operate in the state of New York. Cough, cough. Excuse me while I laugh. The DFS thanks our federal partners at the US Department of Justice, the Department of the Treasury, and the Federal Reserve Board for their assistance and coordination during this investigation. Now, the agreements and resolutions include agreements with BHBM and BHS, collectively the bank, under which the bank agreed to accept responsibility for its conduct by stipulating to the accuracy of extensive statements of facts, and BHBM further agreed to refrain from all future criminal conduct, implement remedial measures, and fully cooperate with further investigations into hidden bank accounts. I wonder who unearthed that. Well, regular members will know. Assuming BHBM's continued compliance with its agreement, the government has agreed to defer prosecution of BHBM for a period of 3 years. Really? Imagine if you did this. Anyone listening? It's an immediate arrest. Why the difference? After which time the government will seek to dismiss the charge against BHBM. And according to documents that were filed in Manhattan Federal Court this week, BHBM is Israel's largest bank and operates primarily as a retail bank with approximately 250 branches throughout Israel and more than 2.5 million accounts. And in addition to retail banking services, BHBM offered private banking services for onshore and offshore customers through its retail branches and its global private banking centre. BHBM also wholly owned Poalim Trust Services Limited, POALIM, which provided trust information, formation, and also management services. Outside Israel, BHBM owned BHS, which is the Swiss subsidiary that provided the private banking. Rothschilds. BHS is headquartered in Zurich and at times during the prosecution period had branches in Geneva, Luxembourg, and Singapore. BHBM also had branches in New York, Miami, the Cayman Islands, the UK, and Jersey. From at least in or about 2002 and continuing at least or about 2014, no, it went much further than that, the bank conspired with employees, US customers, and others to 1. Defraud the United States with respect to taxes, 2. File false federal tax returns, and 3. Commit tax evasion. Employees of BHBM and BHS assisted US customers in concealing their ownership and control of assets and funds held at the bank, which enabled those US customers to evade their US tax obligations by engaging in the following conduct: assisting US customers with opening and maintaining accounts in the name of pseudonyms. There they go with their name changes again, a bit like Teen Bubba, really. Same people. Code names, trust accounts, and offshore nominee entities. Opening customer accounts for known US customers using non-US forms of identification, enabling US taxpayers to evade US reporting requirements on securities earnings in violation of the bank's agreements with the IRS, providing hold mail services for a fee, avoiding any correspondence regarding the undeclared account being sent to the US. So in other words, blind mail. Offering back-to-back loans for US taxpayers to enable them to access funds in the United States that were held in offshore accounts at the bank in Switzerland and Israel, and also processing wire transfers or issuing checks in the amounts of less than $10,000 that were drawn on the accounts of US taxpayers or entities in order to avoid triggering scrutiny. At least 4 senior executives of the bank, including 2 former members of BHS Board of Directors, were directly involved in aiding and abetting tax evasion of US taxpayers. Under today's resolution, the bank is required to cooperate fully with ongoing investigations, which will no doubt have a much larger fine based on the previous one, and it may later uncover regarding US-related accounts. The bank is also required to disclose information consistent with the Department of Justice Swiss bank program relating to accounts closed between January 2009 and December 2019. And the agreements provide no protection from criminal or civil prosecution for any individuals. BHBM will pay a total of $214.38 million, which has 3 parts. First, BHBM has agreed to pay $77.8 million in restitution to the IRS, which represents the unpaid taxes resulting from BHBM's participation in the conspiracy. Second, BHBM has agreed to forfeit $35.6 million to the United States, which represents gross fees, not profits, that the bank earned on its undeclared accounts between 2002 and 2014, And finally, BHBM has agreed to pay a penalty of $100.8 million. BHS will pay out a total of $402.5 million, which also has three parts. They agreed to pay $139 million in restitution to the IRS, which represents the unpaid taxes. Second, agreed to forfeit $124.6 million in gross fees to the United States. And finally, they've agreed to pay a fine of $139 million. And these payments were approved by Judge Vyaskill today in connection with BHS's plea and sentencing. Both the penalty and the fine amounts take into consideration that the bank, after initially providing deficient cooperation through an inadequate internal investigation, no surprise there, and the provision of incomplete and inaccurate information and data to the government, and thereafter conducted a thorough internal investigation, provided client-identifying information, and cooperated in ongoing investigations and prosecutions. Ongoing being the operative word. And the bank further implemented remedial measures to protect against the use of its services for tax evasion in the future. The Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System is also announcing that it has reached a resolution with BHBM, by which BHBM has agreed to a consent order, certain remedial steps to ensure its compliance with US law in its ongoing operations, and a civil monetary penalty of $37.35 million. Additionally, the New York State Department of Financial Services is announcing a similar resolution by which BHBM has agreed to cease and desist order and a monetary penalty of $220 million. Now, this agreement marks the third time an Israeli bank has admitted to similar criminal conduct. The bank Leumi Group, Leumi, in December of 2014, and Mizrahi Tefahot Bank Limited in March 2019 entered into DPAs with the Department of Justice, admitting that they conspired with US taxpayers to prepare and present false tax returns to the IRS by hiding income and assets in offshore bank accounts in Israel and elsewhere around the world. Deputy Attorney General Rosen, Principal Deputy General Zuckerman, US Attorney Berman, and the Chief Fort commended special agents of the IRS Criminal Investigation who investigated this case, and Chief Assistant Todd A. Ellenwood and Senior Litigation Counsel Nanette Davis of the Tax Division, Assistant U.S. Attorney Saga K. Ravi, and Timothy V. Capozzi of the United States Attorney Office for the Southern District of New York, who prosecuted this case. Principal Deputy Assistant General Zuckerman also thanked Assistant Chief Kathleen Barry and former trial attorney Timothy Russo of the Tax Division for their assistance. And there you have it. Further evidence of the Black Sun War against the Rothschilds in a nutshell. And QAnons need to get more aware of who and what they are celebrating as the recent takeover of the Fed. It was not for and by the people, but the Black Sun. The Rothschilds are bad. There's no getting away from that. And all of their ilk need to return to source. All of them are corrupted and not redeemable. But the Black Sun are no different. They and the Rothschilds are two peas in the same pod. Evil personified.